all, I have a simple question for everyone here. Since I will be talking about resilience in some form, I want to understand what is resilience to you. Any volunteers would like to answer this for me? No one? Okay. I will answer this myself in the later half of the presentation though. So let me give you guys a quick roundup of why we are here, right? So resilience is one of those key jargons or terms that we hear day in and day out in our supply chain meetings, in our strategic meetings, and in such conferences. The challenge here with resilience is that more than 50% companies will never achieve true resilience. And I will back that up with some data towards the end. So why are people like all of us, right, and including ourselves, we're trying to fight against something that is not achievable? Because there are now ways possible to make resilience somewhat closer to what it was before, and that happens with data. So I will try and be very brief in this conversation. I will try and take you through what have we learned over the events, and how is logistics as an industry shaping towards resilience, and what auto companies are doing. And I will be bringing up some of the biggest auto giants, so Tata Motors, Honda. A few of these are our customers as well, so we'll be picking up a few key pages from their playbooks and sharing these insights, so that by the end of this session, either you will go back to your teams and have your teams vet some of my numbers, or at the end of the day, you'll take some insights from this presentation that you can implement in your supply chains to be more resilient. So, quick backstory. A company was founded by 4 IITians when they were actually drop shipping. So this started long back when they were trying to drop ship, and they were managing their freight by themselves with the help of freight forwarders, of course. And that is when our 4 founders, they hit a snag. They realized that supply chain was a complicated mess that they couldn't understand initially, and the larger problem here was manual work. Essentially, everything in supply chains and in logistics particularly was happening manually. And even so, even till date, we do see that. And the challenge here is, from the moment onwards you start procuring rates to the end of the line, tracking, and as well as final invoice payments, everything happens manually. And this is a pain for people who come from a technical background, who know this can be completely automated. Another thing that we saw in the industry was the fact that this was a decade back when almost every other business function had a specialized tool, a software that could do the job for their business functions. So you talk about HR, we have HRMS systems like Workday that are doing a lot of work for the HR teams. You have Tally for finance teams. You have Salesforce for sales teams. You have HubSpot for marketing teams. There was a dedicated system for every business function, but logistics. And how this was being done by companies was that they were actually utilizing their ERPs in some sort of a force-fitted way, where their SAPs or their ERPs were tweaked in order to make some of these use cases work, predominantly for recording data. And that is what we saw in the industry, which is when we started our journey into digital transformation. That was our goal, and we wanted to build that system. And we've been fortunate enough to be partnered with a lot of great brands and leaders who were willing to take part in this change. And I will be talking about very specifically from the experience and the learnings we've had from the automotive industry to make it relevant for all of you. But this is where we're coming from. Now, what has happened, right? COVID-19, I think this was mentioned a couple of times in the past as well, that COVID-19 did expedite the process overall. And though it was a disaster, the golden era of supply chain started right after COVID. In fact, Gartner did a survey in 2020, right when the outbreak was fairly recent, and what they realized was that business leaders actually felt this. The business changed more in the first few months than it had in the previous decade, which was again something that was mentioned in a couple of these conversations before. And that created a reactive change in the process, where a lot of people started digitizing exponentially fast. Businesses started pushing systems, they started pushing visibility tools, which was the first thing that came in, right? And that is where businesses pushed. But there was another follow-up survey done by Harvard Business Review in 21 August, which also said that Out of a lot of companies that worked on this, right, despite all the efforts, 72% of companies actually felt that their systems were digitally immature. Now, this is what Harvard has rightly put as the three pillars of resilience in their study: visibility, planning, and collaboration. Now, if you look at it that way, right, all of these three pillars were there. Businesses have been working on this for some time now. And we went back to check in on these tenets to see where we stand. And that is when we realized that 8 on 10 visibility solutions that are there out there, these are your typical track and trace solutions that businesses use, they only make you aware, not resilient. Which means you will only know all of these delays once it has already happened. So there is not a lot that can be done in such instances besides rapid action to manage this and maybe manage the expectations of your customers. Another interesting thing was the employees who are responsible for all the operations. They are now using a very ERP centric legacy tool, which is super hard to extract data out of, which is why a lot of the planning where they have data, they don't use this data because it's not accessible to them. They need an IT guy to help them get the data first. Then they would analyze this and then they would put it into their planning, which is too much hassle. They have a lot of work already, which is why this again does not work. And the last thing, collaboration, I think with supply chains, when we started off, the first thing we saw was that everything happens on either WhatsApp, phone calls, emails for some. I mean, that's still some sort of structure, but again, it's very loose. And then that's still continuing till date. And at the end of this, can you guess the result of all of these efforts and everything that people have done? We analyzed the data on our platform. We do have a track and trace system, and we realized that out of 1.5 million plus containers that we tracked in 2023, more than 57.3% did not arrive in time. And when I say did not arrive in time, this basically means that this was what was promised to them. This is what they promised to their end customers, their end stakeholders, and that's how accurate it was. Which basically brings us back to the point that what's the future? I mean, we've been digitizing and that was the future for a lot of businesses, but now it's not enough. And that is when we particularly got in. We had a lot of discussions with people that we know. Some are customers, some not. And we tried to understand from them, right? Let's say there were no limitations, right? A very radical what if. What if you had all the data that is possible in supply chains, everything that is being generated, right? What would you do? And we got a few very, very interesting examples of what people wanted from digital systems. First thing that came up to us was track and trace. Well, there are a lot. The challenge here is, can there be a track and trace system that can anticipate risks in my shipments that are still on track? So they wanted a list of their shipments which are currently green to be flagged at risk so that they are better prepared when there is an exception, they can plan ahead. Another interesting thing that came to us was during COVID, one thing that was shattered besides businesses was the trust on carriers. And that is precisely because a lot of the carriers, they gave a certain promised arrival plan. And towards the end of the line, that plan kept on changing and businesses couldn't trust that anymore. And that is what happened. So what they wanted was a market aggregate that could help them see how reliable their carrier is. What can they expect? And that's precisely what they asked for. They said, give us what is the promised time, give us what is the actual time that you are observing, and just tell us what should be our educated guess when we are communicating this to our customers so that we have a healthy buffer. So that at the end of the day, for our customers, our shipments always arrive before time, never after. Another interesting thing that happened was the same data, right? Again, we're still very reactive there. Businesses wanted all of this information at the very beginning when they are doing all the planning. And that's where things got interesting because we did a quick analysis on our data and we realized that across the globe, across all the lanes, there are some carriers that outperform all the others. And these are not predominantly the larger ones. In a lot of instances, these are smaller regional carriers that are masters of their local regional lanes. But a lot of people don't know this. And because they don't have access to this information, they lose out on this competitive advantage that could have been theirs. And that's exactly what they asked for. They said, while we are negotiating on your platform, can you just give us a rating system that could help us identify which is a reliable carrier, which is not? And if there is one, we'll choose that. At the end of it, it all boils down to cost because logistics as a function has been very driven with cost, I think. And the more cost we can save while ensuring all the service parameters are in check, that's a key. So they basically asked us to put it down in a simple format saying that just tell us who are the final vendors in my final shortlist. what is the schedule that they are promising, what is their actual on ground performance that I can expect, and what's the cost. And why this is interesting to me is because a lot of times, right, when we award business to a particular shipping line quote, we are only looking at the promised time. And that promised time in a lot of times is, as we know, it's not going to hold true. So if I look at this shipment, and if I had an urgent shipment, I would have given it to MSC there. I would have said, hey, 28 days, this is great. I'll go ahead with this one because I'm saving 2 days. But on ground, it would have ended up being 30. So my team at the end of the day would have felt this, yeah, I mean, was it worth paying the extra $50? Because at the end of the day, I got my shipment in 30. And that is the kind of information, again, which businesses needed. So long story short, we worked with some of these players to build a solution which will fall in line with what their expectations are and help them do a little better than what they did before. And it started off with track and trace. So I think this is what a typical track and trace screenshot looks like on our solution as well. I'll not dive very deep into this, but the idea here is that you can see there is a predictive ETA right there. Now, interestingly, this is what a lot of businesses get in their visibility towards the end of the shipment. But if I take a deeper look in this, we also had an arrival reliability rating here. And this, you always get it at the start of the shipment. And it basically tells you, okay, this is the carrier that you're using for your tracking. On this particular lane is what you're shipping. This is the on-time performance. And these are the deviation stats. So you have a deviation of 2 days typically as per the benchmark. And that is what it ended up being. Predictive ETA is amazing tool to help you identify those external factors, port congestion. There could be many other external factors, but on a ground level, this basically helps you understand where the expectations need to be aligned slightly better, looking at the realistic values. And that's what we've done. So apart from that, you get a list of all the carriers, the ones that are performing better on this lane. And this should basically give your teams an extra piece of information so that next time they move for any next shipment, they will definitely consider this because now they have information and access to this. And another small addition to this was, since we heard from a lot of people that ETAs were not reliable anymore, we created an ETA log, which will also help you see how many times the ETA were updated. A lot of the times with carriers, there are SLAs. And these businesses, they wanted us to help them better manage these SLAs and better visualize where there were breaches on these SLAs so that this could then be helped in their either further negotiations or in some instances to ensure that they're getting the right service from the carrier. And you can see, right, in this case, this shipment had an ETA of 29th November. On 30th November, when it was supposed to arrive, the carrier said it will now arrive on 2nd December, which is now again a couple days ahead. So these are the kind of challenges that people usually face, right, when they are very reactive, right? Again, and many solutions out there don't have any data. So this is essentially where we were when we said, okay, visibility is one of the pillars that can be fixed, and we wanted to add to that. Planning is something that many people have not touched upon. I think there are very, very, very few solutions out there in the market that help in planning. And we created a schedule tool. So generally how planning happens in supply chain and in international logistics is there will be a planning team that will look at sailing schedules, ocean schedules. They will try and find out, okay, I have to move my shipment tomorrow. Which are the next vessels that I can get to in the cutoff dates? And they will just give business to whichever is falling in line with the arrival date that they are expecting. Now, the challenge here is there can be multiple carriers. As we have already seen, there can be multiple reliability stats. Carriers may or may not hold on to the final value. And that is where you see these arrival dates. But having this extra piece of information which tells you whether or not a carrier is reliable or not, that makes a difference. So, for example, this one, if you look at the first two schedules, you can see that they are both practically going to arrive on the same date, but one with a higher reliability and one with lower. Which one would you go with? So that is essentially how we think data can help, right? And on top of that, we also have an industry freight rate benchmark, which helps you see what the optimum rates on the market are, right? And by using these data points, right, I think businesses today can make better decisions like they are doing in their everyday life. So today, I think we make a lot of decisions every single day and we rely on data for that. And I can give you a few examples, right? So if I had to go and watch Animal today, I would definitely either ask a few friends or I would go to IMDb and I would check the rating. Is the rating good enough? Is this movie something that I should spend my time on? Another good example, I think a lot of people here must have used Google Maps to get here, right? Whether to understand what the ETAs were or to maybe look at the directions and find out what would be the optimal route that you should take to this hotel. And essentially, the reason why we do this is because it is easier than it was before. Data has always been here, it has been around. The only thing that has changed is the fact that this data is now easier to access, which means now you use it more. And that's exactly what I'm here to pitch and maybe get you guys to think about, is that why cannot we work on building such systems where the data, in some instances, is not even the data that we provide. It could be the data that you have internally in your organizations, in your ERPs. How can we make this data accessible to the teams in ways that this data will be used by the teams every day to make better decisions? And yeah, that's it. End of the line. I hope I didn't bore everyone.
So how do you, what's the business model to provide your services to businesses?
So typically, again, we're a modular SaaS system. It's a monthly subscription fee that you pay for the software, and everything is done on cloud, so it can be accessed on browsers. Uh, the use cases, they basically split. So, for example, if you're looking at visibility, we have a track and trace solution which comes with the data. So it comes with a monthly recurring fee for the visibility platform, which includes all the data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it partly does. But have you got data of how much cost you have saved with case studies?
Yes. So I think with regards to visibility specifically, there are no direct correlations. However, we do have a procurement module that helps businesses automate their freight negotiations, and we have done the numbers there, and we have seen our customers save upwards of, I think, 18% in their freight spends that they do. So that is the fact that we have for procurement. For visibility, that's something that we're yet to tabulate.
Hello, this is Deepak here. I have just one question with regards to packaging. We are into returnable packaging across India. It's into domestic. We have multiple foldable bins, crates, and big boxes which goes to multiple tier ones and OEMs. So how this can be integrated at the OEM, and we can track these assets if it is going near any blind spots inside the OEM plants. Can it be integrated?
Okay, so let me repeat that so that we're on the
Yeah,
same page.
please.
So what I understand is you are into packaging, right? And you would like more visibility on ground within the premises and blind spots in the factory, right?
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, our system is designed for international movements. So we do provide domestic support, but it also comes in an extension to end-to-end shipping. So we do provide domestic at the end or at the start of long haul, but specifically the use case that you're looking for, we do not have the answer to that for now.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.